Walter, I always get that wrong. Walter Almeida says, this is a long one. Our ideas for elevating the poor depend on a society-wide implementation of our philosophy. However, to a family who is genuinely down and out, our ideas will seem abstract and impractical. These ideas, as wonderful as they are, will not provide a hot meal in their stomachs, a paid electric bill, or a roof over their heads tonight. The liberal strategy will provide the poor with what they need and more, but come with the price of unsustainability, dependency, and indignity. How do we as conservatives help the poor on a practical and tangible level at this very moment while avoiding the pitfalls of the liberal policies? Oh, and how do we do it in a way that lets them know that conservatism is helping them, not liberalism? I can't do anything about the last part because the one thing you can say about... I'm never calling these people liberals again, by the way. Leftists or progressives. The one thing about leftists and progressives that you can be absolutely certain of is that they will take credit for everything after they've screwed it up. Barney Frank was the primary person responsible for the housing bubble, and the legislation responsible for closing the gaps in that legislation and dealing with the outrages of that legislation was called the Frank Bill, because Barney Frank, who caused the problem, then became a champion of being the person whose name was on the end of the problem. I was going to save this for last, but it kind of goes for it later. Here's a little card that somebody sent in, and it said... They called me a socialist, too, when I saved the country from the Great Depression. Well, the problem with this card, which is another one of these pieces of liberal wisdom here, I did it again, progressive wisdom, leftist wisdom, is that, first of all, you are a socialist, Franklin, and secondly, you didn't save the country from the Great Depression. You caused the Great Depression. The reason it was called the Great Depression was because your idiotic policies made it last for 9 years instead of 2 years, as it had with Calvin Coolidge a few years before, where he was in worse economic trouble, cut the federal tax spending by half. Gone. We went from being in this mini depression to a period called the Roaring Twenties. Unemployment fell from I don't even remember the numbers of what Coolidge did. But no, FDR got in there and did exactly the opposite, and he took what might have been a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year depression, turned it into 11-year depression, the Great Depression, when everybody was out of work. Barack Obama's done the same thing, but Barack Obama presumably would have had the experience of seeing FDR, but no, obviously not. They're just too stupid to make that connection. So back to your question, how do we help poor people without them taking credit? If we do help poor people, they will take the credit. That's just the way they are. They're shameless, honorless individuals. But the question is a very serious question. It's a very good question, actually. One of the problems we do have as conservatives is twofold, and I think most of it is driven by the fact that most conservatives are sensible people. And since they're sensible people, most conservatives that I've met don't get into the kind of trouble that people find themselves into. Most of the conservatives I met come from happy homes with good fathers and good mothers, and they've understood the value of savings and hard work and education. They've had great support systems. They're surrounded by people who delay gratification. They're surrounded by people who discipline themselves, both in terms of their time, their work, their personal habits, their appetites, all these things. So they learned how to become reasonable, effective citizens, and they learned how to become people who don't get into those kind of troubles. But some people do get into those kind of troubles. A lot of people get into those kind of troubles, and I'm one of those people that got into those kind of troubles. I was living in a friend's garage for 6 months. I've had my power turned off for years, just cut off because I didn't have the money for it. And I've had people knocking on my door asking for rent too. So I know what that's like. I know how I got into that trouble, and I kind of know how I got out of the trouble. But the one thing that we do have to be careful of, and that we don't do nearly enough of, is this idea that, well, the poor, just screw them. To hell with them. It's their fault. They got in that trouble. It's their problem. Get out of it. That's not going to help on a lot of levels. First of all, certainly not going to help us win elections, which would be nice. Secondly, it's not kind. And you're going to have to look a long way before you find somebody who's more opposed to forced charity than I am. I just have to respond to something. Laughing Hyena said, at least FDR tried to win World War II. FDR deserves credit for a lot of things. I think he was a pretty good war president, but I will tell you what FDR deserves a great deal of credit for. And I just have to get this in here because being fair is important. It's a difference between us and them. What FDR did do, at great personal risk to himself, was FDR kept America in the war before America got into the war, with Lend-Lease primarily. No one talks about Lend-Lease. Everybody talks about the Marshall Plan. Everybody talks about the Normandy invasion, all that other stuff. Pretty much FDR by himself determined that this war that was brewing in Germany, it started in Germany, was going to be the end of civilization. And even though he didn't have the power to declare war at that time, he did make sure that both Britain and the Russians got the kind of military aid that they needed to stay in that war. I do not believe Britain would have survived the war. I know Britain wouldn't have survived the war without Lend-Lease. And I don't think the Russians would have either. That was an important thing to do. And I thought as a war president, he really wasn't too bad. But domestically, he was the worst thing since Wilson. And you put Wilson, Roosevelt, Johnson, and Obama in the same room, and you've got every problem we ever had. So back to this problem of how do you actually help people? Well, there's a lot of ways that you can help people, and I think I've never seen it better in practice. It was on a relatively small scale than I did when I visited the Mormons. I went up to Salt Lake City in 2009 or 10, I wanted to say, and I was given a tour of, I think it was called Welfare Square, where what the Mormon Church was doing was they were canning and preserving huge quantities of food and distributing them all around the world with no fanfare at all. They get a lot of bad press. I don't hear that they ever get any good press. And they showed me a bunch of things that I thought was very interesting there. For example, in the facility where all of this food was canned or jarred, they said there was a machine that they could have bought. Honestly, now this is what they told me, that would mechanically screw the jar on, but they decided not to get it because it was important that they give somebody the job to screw these jars on. And so what they would do with people who were destitute in the Mormon Church was they would take these people in, and they did two things that I think are critical. The first thing they did was, instead of giving them money, they gave them work. They gave them work, and they gave them work, and that work allowed them to buy food, and that was important. But the thing that they did that I think was critical was they basically adopted them. Because really, folks, nobody really wants to talk about this. But when you get down to the heart of what poverty is, poverty in America anyway, because we don't have poverty in the same way that actual poverty is. Poverty in America is the result of a ongoing series of terribly bad decisions. Some of these bad decisions are subsidized by the federal government. If you tell a single mother that she gets a certain amount of money a month, but if she has a kid, she gets more money. And if she has 2 kids, she gets more money. And if she has 8 kids, she gets even more money. Then you are subsidizing fatherless children. You're paying for it. Don't be surprised if you get it. That has to go away right away. What the Mormons did was they took an individual family or an individual and gave them a support structure of people who didn't make bad decisions. They showed them how to make food out of bags of rice. Most people didn't know how to do that. They didn't know how to make good food, inexpensively. They didn't know how to do much of anything. One of the greatest things I ever read about poverty was about a guy in San Francisco. He was a big liberal, and I assume he was. I assume he was when he went in anyway. And he decided he wanted to live among the poor of San Francisco for a couple years, just kind of an upscale, well-educated white guy. And he just decided he's going to go live with the poor. Lived in ghettos and lived in these god-awful places. He lived in places where somebody would get a new sofa. I'll never forget this story. They would get a new sofa or a new used sofa, and they'd take it up 3 flights of stairs or whatever, and they'd put the new sofa in the living room. They'd take the old sofa out of the living room, and they'd leave it in the hall. They'd just leave it there. For how long? Forever. People had to walk over the sofa because they didn't, on some level, it's really true. They didn't know any better. They just didn't know any better. You got some serious issues here. This is an episode we spend 5 hours on just this. One of the great unspoken things too is how deeply poverty is connected to IQ and intelligence. It's a remarkable correlation. Crime, poverty, and intelligence directly correlated. Criminals are criminals because they literally don't have the brain power to be able to foresee what the consequences of their actions are. They live in the moment. Maybe they live one step ahead of their move. They're not thinking 5 steps ahead or 10 steps ahead. Getting out of poverty requires planning. It requires short-term planning in terms of saving enough money so that you can pay your bills at the end of the month, because you got to know what those bills are. And it requires long-term planning in terms of understanding that you have to save even more so that your kids can get an education so they won't be poor. But one of the most important things I ever heard about poverty was that in America anyway, I forget what the 3 things were exactly, but I think mostly it was if you wait until if you finish high school, if you don't have children until you're married, and there was one other thing, simple thing like that, probably just those 2. Finish high school and don't have kids until you're married. There is no poverty in America for those people. Virtually unheard of. So the short answer is we can't go in there like we're going to burn their houses down. And sometimes we do. And certainly that's what they hear, and that's what the media tells them we want to do, and that's what the Democrats tell them we want to do. But we don't want to burn their houses down. What we want to do is we want to build another set of houses. We want to build a parallel structure of houses that they can live in. And when I say a house, I mean a way of life. So you don't go into America and say, well, we're just going to cut welfare. The checks are going to get cut. Too bad for you. Not only people aren't going to vote for you that way, they're going to riot. And I don't blame them. I'd riot too if my food was being taken away. What we have to do is we have to say we are going to start a long and slow transition, because it took a long time to get here, to move you to this other world. But the one thing we have to do, and this is what Mitt Romney could not do to save his life, is we have to tell people this is not a sacrifice. We're not moving you into worse housing. We're moving you into better housing. When Romney was saying, 49% of the people or 47% are unreachable because they get government benefits, that's when he lost the election. Not because of the fallout of that, because he's right, by the way. He lost the election because he gave up on those people. You can't give up half the country and win an election. Mitt Romney should have had a plan for every single American to vote for Mitt Romney. Every single American to vote for Mitt Romney. And the way you do that is to say, yes, right now the Democrats are giving you free health care and free housing and free phones and free everything. And if I was Romney, I would have said, but the housing is crap. You know it's crap because you live in it. The transportation and the buses and stuff, that's crap too. You know it's crap because you ride them every day. The food is crap because you buy the stuff on the EBT card. You know it's crap. And the phone that you get is a crappy old phone with 60 minutes on it or something. It's a piece of crap second-generation phone, and that's crap too. And I'm going to show you how you can have stuff that's not crap. What Mitt Romney should have done is not say we're coming to take away your phone. We're coming to show you how to get a better phone. We're going to show you how you can have an iPhone 6, because when we're done, you're going to be able to go out and buy what you want to. You're going to live in an apartment you want. You're going to buy a car within reason that is a nice car that you want to drive around, whatever you want. We're going to show you how to do that, because we're not going to treat you like a piece of dead wood that floats downstream that we call upon for 1 hour every 2 years. We're going to treat you like human beings who are masters of your own destiny. We're going to treat you like men who provide for your families. And we're going to give you a chance to make a better life for yourself, a better life than you ever imagined. And it's not just the financial gains. That's the smallest part of it. We're going to teach you how to take control of your life. We're going to put an outboard motor on this raft that you're on. And you're not going to just float down the river of your life like you have been for the last 20 or 30 years. You're not going to just float down the river of life wherever the river is taking you. We're going to show you how to move around in that river. We're going to show you how to go to the left or to the right, and we're going to show you, if you work hard enough, how you can go back upstream and go wherever you damn well want to. You're going to be masters of your own fate and destiny. And if you want something and you're ready to work for it, you can have it. That's what we're going to teach them. And you're going to have to do it one by one. And then we're going to have to hand them off to people who are going to have to mentor them and tutor them and treat them just like any other people with serious illness. We're going to have to teach them how to get better. That's it. We can't pander to them, and we can't pretend that this isn't going to be difficult. It is difficult. It's difficult. It's very hard to kick heroin. But the alternative to not kicking heroin is to die. And before you die, you spend your life in a coma. It may seem pleasant while the high is starting, but it's never as pleasant as actual achievement is And most of the time it's hell. And then you die. And we want to save you from that. We're not going to keep supplying you with the injections. That's their job over there for the Democrats and the rest of the progressives. They keep handing you needles because they like useless people who have no control over their lives, who are dependent on them. They just need your vote, by the way. By the way, if you didn't have a vote, poor people, they would leave you to the wolves. It's only because we have a system based on voting that they're ready to do this. They're ready to give you the bare bone minimum that they have to, because if they didn't have your vote every 2 years, they wouldn't have the power for them to fly around in corporate jets. Barack Obama flies around in a 747. That's why he wants to be president. And Hillary Clinton flies around in a 747. And so did Bill, and so did the rest of them. And so did George Bush, for that matter. Do any of these people, do you think that any of them could have afforded a 747 on their own? No. They get their benefits by pandering to you, and the way they pander to you is to make you helpless and useless and worthless. And that's what they've been doing, and we're going to stop it.